both of you guys for joining us here today for another episode of The Exchange. Before we get into today's conversation about sugar, I want to introduce our two guests. First, joining us is Gilles Schrevel. Gilles has worked for nearly 40 years in the sugar beet manufacturing industry, specifically in Europe. Today, he is a senior consultant for the Sugar Manufacturers Association in France, where he specializes in providing training in sugar technology for workers, engineers, and so forth. Gilles, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Joining myself and Gilles is Jean-Marc. Jean-Marc is our global sales director for sugar here at Solex Thermal Science. For the last better part of 20 years now, since 2001, he has more specifically helped establish Solex as a global leader in heat transfer solutions for the sugar beet, cane, and refining applications. And even more recently, Jean-Marc has taken the role of leading our efforts in Africa. Jean-Marc, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you.
So let's get to it. I want to pose this question to you, Gilles. Where is the majority of sugar produced today, and what production trends have we seen emerge in recent years?
Today, the world sugar production is about 170 billion tons of sugar per year. And over the world, there are today 200 countries, and 110 countries are producing sugar. But if we have a look on the production of sugars from each country, we can see that about 60% of all the sugar production in the world is produced by 5 main producers: Brazil, the European Union, Thailand, India, and China. We can say also that about 80% of the sugar is produced from cane and 20% is produced from beet.
And maybe as a follow-up, I'll throw this over to you, Jean-Marc. In contrast, I'm interested to know a little bit more about how these production trends compare with sugar consumption patterns in recent years.
Yes, that's a very interesting question. The highest consumption of sugar is in the US, with 45 kilo per habitant per year, which is quite a lot. In Europe, we have several country with about 35, 37 kilo, like Germany, Netherlands, Belgium. In France, they are not so high. They are maybe with 25 kilo per habitant per year. You have some country where the consumption is still very low, like in China, it's around 6 kilo per habitant per year. And in India, it's about 1.9 kilo, which is very low.
If we have a look on the world sugar consumption of sugar, the increase is about 1% per year. The average from the last 10 years. But if we have a look on the last 5 years, the consumption decreased a little bit all over the world. And I think it is due to health concern all over the world because people maybe have a bad image of sugar. And the second reason is maybe due to the COVID-19 and the consumption in the world that decreased.
Let's talk about the price of sugar. It's been well advertised in the industry over the recent years. It's dropped as low as €300. So my question is to you, Gilles. How do dips like this compare with sugar prices historically?
If we look at the prices at the beginning of the 2000, between 2000 and 2004, the prices were very low, and also in 2008. And I think that the reason is that main actors like Brazil, for example, can switch very easily from production of ethanol to production of sugar and vice versa.
Just to give you some figures, around 2014, for instance, country like Thailand was producing and exporting about 7.5 million tons of sugar. And those days they are exporting about 11.5. You see, some country they have increased. Also, that's the same with India. They've increased the production to have a better balance. But by increasing the production of sugar, the world has an overproduction compared to the consumption.
The third reason of the increase of stocks is the production of European Union, because the European Union decided to stop the system of the quota in October 17. And many sugar manufacturers in Europe decided to produce a lot in order to reduce the production cost of sugar. And so in 17, India, European Union and Thailand produced a lot, and that's the reasons why the stocks are even today very high.
Of course, when we talk about the sugar industry, not all products are created equal. So, for example, there's a noticeable difference between sugar beet and sugar cane in terms of production costs, crops, and so on. My question is for you, Jean-Marc. Can you provide a little bit more detail on those differences?
Sure. As Gilles was mentioning, about 70 to 80% of the sugar worldwide is produced with sugarcane. But the big difference is when we make a plantation for sugarcane, you can harvest up to 10 times without to replant, you see. And with sugar beet, you have to plant the seeds every year. That's one big difference. Another big difference, the sugar concentration in sugar beet, it's more around 80%. It could go up to 20%, whereas in the sugarcane is more on between 13 and 15%, is less. But the biggest difference is, of course, that with sugarcane, you get as a result after the extraction, the bagasse, and the bagasse is used in the boiler to produce energy. That means they bring the sugar with the energy for the process. And that's the big advantage which make the entire process less expensive to extract the sugar, because they have the energy available with the plant, so to say. Whereas with the sugar beet, they need some external energy to produce steam.
Now, Gilles, you spent a lot of your career in the sugar beet industry. Maybe a question for you. What are some of the big trends and challenges that you've seen in Europe as it relates to that industry?
So the big trend in Europe is to decrease the cost of production because Europe is not protected today by the system of the quota. So sugar manufacturers have to produce with a low cost. And the trend is to have longer campaigns in order to reduce the cost, and also to try to have a kind of diversification, like in cane, for example. In cane, they produce ethanol with sugar from cane.
We can't talk about differences in sugar without addressing the different levels of quality. My question is for you, Jean-Marc. What role does the cooling stage before storage and packaging have on that final product?
First of all, you have to control the moisture of the sugar very well. And generally speaking, it's admitted that the sugar should have a moisture less than 0.04% before you will start to put this in the storage. The other point is you should not have too many fine in the sugar, because the fine will play a role like a cement between the particle. If you have too many fines, it's not good for the storage. The other parameter is the temperature of the sugar. You should avoid to have too big difference between the temperature of the sugar and the temperature where you will store the sugar. Otherwise, you may have some water migration, and subsequently you may have caking, and that's what you want to avoid, you see.
Gilles, in follow-up to this, explain a little bit of what the maturation of sugar means, and is it always needed?
It's a very difficult question, the question of maturation. We know that during the drying step of the sugar, we always have a film of amorphous sugar. And amorphous sugar is unstable. And this instability leads to further caking of the sugar. And that's why I am in favor of maturation for all the sugars, especially for sugar factories that are transporting the sugar on long distances, for example, from the south hemisphere to the north.
Just one small story. It was in South America, where the people were making packaging straight without to make maturation. And when they were sending the bags of sugar in a very short distance, it was okay. But when it was a long distance and going up, down with different temperature, then they start to see and to get some caking inside the bag. And that was because the difference of temperature, and the sugar was not, let's say, they didn't put the sugar in a maturation cell before, you see.
Perhaps my last question is to both of you. What are sugar production facilities? day to reduce their carbon footprint, and maybe perhaps a bit more specifically to the sugar beet industry, how is it going to adapt to increasing regulatory constraints?
To reduce the carbon footprint, I should say that the first action that is made by sugar factories, it is to switch from coal to gas, natural gas. The second thing is during the transport of the beets. There are a lot of efforts that are made to reduce the emissions of CO2 by the lorries.
Maybe if I may add, even more and more they try to pre-clean the beet in the field, which has the advantage you will not transport all the mud to the plant and coming back, and they try to remove as much as the mud stick to the beet on the spot.
Again, I really appreciate the conversation to both of you guys. Thank you again for your time. Be safe out there, and I hope to talk to you again soon.